discuss what geopolitical approach the United States should be pursuing and what we should be paying attention to. Obama's claim that peace is the only path to true security, and the threats, of course, against Iran and Syria. Joining us, George Birnbaum, the former chief of staff to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the CEO of GEB International, Fox News digital politics editor Chris Stirewalt. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us. And if I may, George, I want to start with you. Bibi Netanyahu could not have been too pleased, whatever else happened today, that President Obama was speaking rather aggressively to the people of Israel over the head of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, you know, a lot of these state visits are public diplomacy. I will say that based on what the president has said in the past few days, there's a hopeful me and there's a cynical me. The hopeful me is that the president has been seeing, as of late, both NSA intelligence reports as well as Israeli intelligence reports, and has come to the conclusion that Iran really is a serious threat. And if you read between the lines, it sounds as if he's given Israel a green light to attack whenever they deem necessary. That's the hopeful me. The cynical me says something else. The cynical me says that based on the past 4 years of the attitude the president has taken towards Israel and towards Mr. Netanyahu in particular, that he's killing Mr. Netanyahu with kindness, he's winning the hearts and minds of the Israelis, the Israeli people, and is going to make a push very hard for a peace deal that probably won't be a good deal for the Israelis. You know, it's troubling because I just don't know what would cause a change of heart over the past 4 years. So the cynical me is probably the feeling that's stronger, that this is going to end up bad for Israel.
Chris, do you agree?
Well, I'm in Washington, so I only need the cynical me. The other me is largely in disuse. For the president, look, in a way, cynically speaking, this was the last campaign stop of the 2012 campaign in a lot of ways for the president. This was a make good, a promise to Jewish American voters who had some deep reservations based on what you guys were just talking about the president's commitment to the state of Israel and his very bad relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, chairwoman of the DNC, was on this trip. It was no accident. So this was in part a make good politically. Now, as it relates to Iran and that stuff, it's funny if we look at the TikTok and we see back in time, the president started out when he was running for office the first time saying we're going to have direct engagement and diplomacy and we won't be like George W. Bush. Well, now the president has gone full circle and made it back to publicly basically taking the same position on Iran and its nuclear program as George W. Bush. So, funny thing.
Only the progress toward a more constrained Iran has ended and has moved now in entirely the other direction. George, Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei saying today Iran will annihilate the Jewish cities of Haifa and Tel Aviv if it comes under attack. Is Israel prepared to defend against such threats?
Sure, Israel's prepared. I think you know, the problem is Israel, as you know, and even as the president has stated, is a country whose security can be measured in miles and minutes. And whilst Israel has wonderful defense systems and missile defense systems, Iran has quite a few major missiles, not the small ones that come in from Hezbollah, from southern Lebanon, or from Hamas, from Gaza, but big warheads, conventional warheads, of course. And only a few need to get through to land in cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa to cause tremendous casualties. And so when people, you know, privately or publicly come and say, why isn't Israel acting? Why aren't they striking against Iran? Well, as the leader of the country of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu has to think about the repercussions of a strike on Iran. And I think some of those repercussions include large civilian casualties. So one should only strike as really a measure of last resort. And not because other external or internal forces are asking him to.
And George, the more bellicose Iran becomes, the algorithm for a preemptive strike on the nuclear plants of Iran are self-evident and before us. The algorithms of preemptive strikes, as they become more bellicose, more threatening, what is the, if you will, the sum of it all? Will there be, in your judgment, a preemptive strike by Israel and perhaps the United States against Iran?
Well, bellicose Iran is nothing new in world history,
Right.
especially in recent world history. You know, I like to give the example of the movie The Bridge on the River Kwai. You don't blow up the bridge when that first pylon is being laid because it's easy to rebuild it and you can do that quickly. But you blow up the bridge when that last plank is being laid right before the train's heading over. And so it requires an enormous amount of good intelligence. But I think what Israel and America is waiting for is really to see if there are other forces, whether it's regime change or diplomacy, that can take effect, and really watching Iran. And when that last plank is laid and that train is about to go over the bridge, I think you'll see a strike if nothing else changes before then.
And Chris Starwold, I want to turn just very quickly. Russian strategic nuclear bombers carrying out a fourth high-profile training flight last week. Is almost concurrent with the purposes of the United States flying its B-52s over North Korea. What do you make of what is transpiring there, very quickly?
Well, it's going to get dicey, and if I could just say that it makes a great point about why Iran wants a nuclear warhead, wants nuclear power, because North Korea, the crackpot government there manages to stay in power, get aid, and get visits from Dennis Rodman just by virtue of having a nuke. So it's a rational impulse for an irrational state to want to have the A-bomb.
Chris Starwold and George Birnbaum, thank you both. Appreciate it very much.
You bet.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Much more on the